An experienced hiker disappeared in the wilderness, leaving behind only his camera. When investigators finally found it 5 years later, the last photo on the memory card showed something that changed everything they thought they knew about his disappearance. What they discovered would reveal a hidden world that some people will kill to protect. Ethan Rivers was the kind of man who found peace in places where most people found fear. At 31, this software engineer from Denver had conquered some of the most challenging trails in the American West, always hiking alone, always pushing further into the wilderness than anyone thought safe. His apartment was a shrine to solo adventure, walls covered with topographical maps marked with routes he'd completed, shelves lined with hiking gear that most outdoor stores couldn't even stock. But what set Ethan apart wasn't just his physical endurance or technical skill. It was his obsessive attention to detail and his habit of documenting everything with a high-end digital camera that never left his side. Ethan treated every hike like a military operation. His sister Rebecca would later tell investigators he'd spend weeks planning a single trip, studying satellite images, weather patterns, geological surveys. He said the mountains were full of secrets, and he was going to find them all. In September 2015, Ethan announced his most ambitious plan yet: a solo hike through the Blackstone Wilderness area in northern Montana, following a route that hadn't been traveled by more than a handful of people in decades. The trail was notorious among hardcore hikers: 47 miles of brutal terrain through some of the most isolated country in North America. But Ethan wasn't just following the official trail. He'd spent months researching historical surveys and old mining maps, plotting what he called ghost routes, paths that existed before the Park Service established official trails. His plan was to follow one of these forgotten routes to reach areas that modern hikers had never seen. On September 12, 2015, Ethan loaded his modified Jeep with enough supplies for a 2-week journey and drove toward the Blackstone trailhead. His last text to Rebecca was typical Ethan: "Heading into paradise. See you on the other side." He had no idea he was driving toward a mystery that would consume 5 years and change everything investigators thought they knew about the wilderness. Ethan's plan was methodical, as always. He would hike 8 miles on the first day to a designated camping spot near Devil's Creek, then tackle the most challenging section, a 15-mile stretch through unmarked territory that would take him over 2 mountain passes and into the heart of the wilderness. His GPS tracker showed steady progress for the first day. The device transmitted his location every 4 hours to a satellite service that Rebecca could monitor online. Everything looked perfect. Ethan was making good time and following his planned route exactly. On September 13th, at 6:42 p.m., Ethan made his scheduled satellite phone check-in with Rebecca. His voice was excited, almost breathless with enthusiasm. "Sis, this place is incredible. I'm camped beside a waterfall that's not on any map. Tomorrow I'm heading into the Ghost Valley, the place the old miners wrote about. If I'm right, I'll be the first person to see it in over a century." That was the last time anyone heard Ethan Rivers' voice. The next scheduled check-in was set for September 14th at 6 p.m. When it didn't come, Rebecca wasn't initially worried. Ethan had missed check-ins before when he was in deep wilderness. But when September 15th passed with no contact, she called the Blackstone Park Service. Ranger Captain Mike Torres had seen this scenario dozens of times. Solo hikers were notorious for losing track of time or pushing beyond their planned routes. "We'll give him another day," Torres told Rebecca. "These mountain men types usually turn up with great stories and dead phone batteries." But Ethan's GPS tracker told a different story. The device had stopped transmitting at 11:47 p.m. on September 13th, somewhere in the middle of the unmarked territory he'd planned to explore. The last ping came from coordinates that put him miles from any established trail, in terrain so rough that even experienced search teams avoided it. By September 16th, when there was still no word from Ethan, Captain Torres initiated a full search and rescue operation. What they found at the trailhead chilled everyone involved. Ethan's Jeep sat exactly where he'd parked it 4 days earlier, covered with a thin layer of mountain dust, but otherwise undisturbed. Inside, searchers found his detailed itinerary, backup supplies, and a laminated emergency contact list, everything a responsible hiker should leave behind. But it was what they found in the backcountry that began to paint a disturbing picture. The search team followed Ethan's GPS coordinates to his last known position, a grueling 8-hour hike through terrain that challenged even experienced mountain rescue specialists. What they discovered was a campsite that told a story of careful preparation suddenly interrupted. Ethan's tent was still standing, perfectly set up according to leave no trace principles. His sleeping bag was laid out, his camp stove positioned for the morning coffee he would never make. But his hiking pack was missing, along with his camera, water bottles, and the custom walking stick he'd carved himself. Most troubling was what searchers found 200 yards from the campsite, a crumpled topographical map that wasn't part of any Park Service publication. This was a high-resolution, custom-printed map with handwritten notations in Ethan's distinctive block letters. The map showed the official Blackstone Trail, but overlaid with red ink marks indicating what Ethan called the real route. His notations referenced Old Mining Road, 1887, Ghost Settlement, verify location, and most ominously, warning, area marked no trespass on 1923 survey. Ranger Torres studied the map with growing unease. In his 20 years with the Park Service, he'd never seen such detailed research into the area's pre-park history. Ethan hadn't just been planning a hike. He'd been planning an expedition into parts of the wilderness that had been deliberately left unmapped. The search expanded to cover 50 square miles of rugged mountain terrain. Helicopter overflights, ground teams with search dogs, and technical rope rescue specialists scoured every canyon, ridge, and valley where Ethan might have traveled. On the 4th day of searching, they found something that made everyone realize this case was about to become much more complicated. Search specialist Diana Walsh was rappelling down a cliff face near Eagle's Nest Ridge when she spotted something that shouldn't have been there. Caught on a pine branch 30 feet down the cliff was a torn piece of high-tech hiking fabric, the distinctive blue-gray material from Ethan's custom jacket. The fabric was fresh, clearly torn recently, and showed signs of being snagged violently, as someone or something had passed by at high speed. But there were no other signs of Ethan anywhere in the area. No footprints, no equipment, no indication of where he might have gone after losing part of his jacket. The discovery shifted the search focus to the canyon system below Eagle's Nest Ridge, a maze of narrow gorges and hidden valleys that few people had ever explored. Search teams rappelled into areas where the sun never fully penetrated, following game trails and rockfall zones where an injured hiker might have sought shelter. 3 days later, searcher Tom Bradley made a discovery that would haunt him for years. Wedged into a crevice beside a 60-foot waterfall, protected from the elements by an overhang of granite, was Ethan's camera. The professional-grade digital SLR was sealed in a waterproof case that had protected it perfectly despite being submerged in the pool at the base of the waterfall. When investigators powered it up, they found something that chilled them to the bone: 247 photographs documenting the last days of Ethan Rivers' life. The early photos were exactly what everyone expected: stunning landscape shots, carefully composed images of mountain peaks and alpine meadows, selfies of Ethan grinning beside spectacular vistas. The photos showed a man living his dream, exploring country that few humans had ever seen. But as investigators scrolled through the chronological sequence of images, the photos began to change. The later images were darker, taken in poor light conditions with shaky hands. They showed dense forest, narrow passages between rocks, and terrain that looked increasingly difficult and dangerous. The final dozen photos were the most disturbing. Taken in near darkness, they showed blurry images of what might have been structures, shadowy shapes that could have been buildings or shelters hidden deep in the forest. And then came the last photograph, an image that would change everything investigators thought they knew about Ethan's disappearance. Photo number 247 on Ethan's memory card was unlike anything the search teams had expected to find. Taken at 11:31 p.m. on September 13th, just 16 minutes before his GPS tracker went silent, the image was blurry and out of focus, clearly shot in panic or haste. But despite the poor quality, the photo showed something that made investigators' blood run cold. A human figure standing approximately 30 feet away from Ethan's position, partially concealed behind a large pine tree. The figure was wearing what appeared to be official clothing, a dark uniform with light-colored patches that looked remarkably similar to Park Service gear. But this wasn't just any park ranger uniform. Enhanced digital analysis revealed details that didn't match standard Park Service equipment: military-style boots, what appeared to be tactical gear, and most disturbing of all, what looked like a weapon in the figure's hands. FBI forensic analysts spent weeks examining the photograph, using advanced enhancement techniques to extract every possible detail. What they discovered was even more troubling than the original image suggested. The figure wasn't just standing there, it was clearly watching Ethan, positioned in a way that suggested deliberate surveillance. The body language, even in the blurry image, suggested someone who was comfortable in the wilderness, someone who belonged there and knew exactly what they were doing. But here's what made the photo truly terrifying. According to Park Service records, no rangers were scheduled to be in that area on September 13th. The nearest official patrol was over 20 miles away, and no search and rescue operations were active until after Ethan was reported missing. So who was the figure in the photograph? And why were they watching Ethan Rivers in the middle of the night, in one of the most remote areas of the Blackstone Wilderness? Captain Torres interviewed every ranger who had been on duty during Ethan's hike. All had solid alibis and could account for their locations during the time the photo was taken. Security footage from ranger stations, GPS logs from official vehicles, and witness statements confirmed that none of the legitimate park personnel could have been in that location. The investigation was about to take a turn that would reveal secrets hidden in the wilderness for decades. While investigators were analyzing the mysterious photograph, Ethan's friend Marcus Chen was going through his apartment, looking for clues that might help explain his disappearance. What Marcus discovered in a hidden hard drive would completely change how everyone understood Ethan's final expedition. Buried in encrypted files on a drive concealed behind Ethan's bookshelf was what he called his research archive. Hundreds of documents, maps, photographs, and historical records related to a single obsession: finding what he believed was a secret settlement hidden somewhere in the Blackstone Wilderness. Ethan's research went back 3 years and was remarkably thorough. He had studied mining records from the 1880s, homestead applications that were never approved, and geological surveys that showed evidence of human habitation in areas that were supposedly pristine wilderness. The files revealed that Ethan wasn't just interested in hiking. He was convinced that somewhere in the mountains was a community of people who had gone dark, living completely off the grid, in a way that few people thought was possible in modern America. His research had led him to believe that this hidden community was located in what he called the Ghost Valley, an area that appeared on 19th century maps, but had been systematically erased from modern Park Service documentation. According to Ethan's notes, the valley was accessible only through a series of unmarked trails that had been deliberately obscured over the decades. He believed the Park Service was complicit in hiding the settlement, possibly to avoid legal complications with people who had established residency before the area became a national wilderness. One file was particularly chilling: a collection of missing person reports from hikers who had disappeared in the Blackstone Wilderness over the past 20 years. Ethan had identified a pattern: experienced solo hikers who went missing while exploring areas that were officially unmapped or designated as unsuitable for public access. His final research note, dated September 10th, just 2 days before he disappeared, read, "I've found the entrance. The Ghost Valley is real, and someone doesn't want it to be found. I'm going to get proof, no matter what the cost." Ethan Rivers hadn't just stumbled into danger. He had walked deliberately toward a secret that someone was willing to kill to protect. Armed with Ethan's research and the disturbing photograph, investigators decided to retrace his planned route into what he called the Ghost Valley. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez coordinated with the Park Service to mount the most extensive wilderness investigation in the area's history. The team included FBI agents, park rangers, search specialists, and a forensic photographer who could analyze the terrain where Ethan's final photos were taken. They followed his GPS coordinates to the exact location where his tracker went silent, then used his research notes to continue along the route he had planned to take. What they found was more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The trail that Ethan had been following wasn't a natural game path or an old mining road. It was a carefully maintained route that showed signs of regular use. Despite being completely absent from official maps, someone had been keeping this path clear, removing fallen trees, maintaining stream crossings, and even installing discrete trail markers that were invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. More alarming were the signs of active surveillance along the route. Hidden cameras mounted in trees, motion sensors disguised as rocks, and what appeared to be observation posts, positioned to monitor anyone approaching the deeper wilderness areas. Agent Martinez realized they weren't just investigating a missing person case. They had stumbled into evidence of a sophisticated operation designed to keep people away from something hidden in the mountains. The breakthrough came when the team found one of Ethan's water bottles beside a stream, approximately 5 miles past his last known position. But it wasn't just abandoned. It had been deliberately placed there, positioned on a rock in a way that suggested someone wanted it to be found. Next to the water bottle was something that made everyone understand the true danger they were walking into. A professionally constructed snare trap, designed to injure anyone who stepped on the concealed trigger mechanism. This wasn't a primitive animal trap. It was a sophisticated device, built with aircraft cable and spring-loaded mechanisms that could break bones or worse. And it was just the first of many that the team would discover as they ventured deeper into the Ghost Valley. Someone had turned this wilderness into a killing field, designed to stop anyone who got too close to whatever they were hiding. Following Ethan's research and avoiding the numerous traps, the FBI team finally reached what he had called the Ghost Valley. What they found was proof that Ethan Rivers had been absolutely right, and that his discovery had cost him his life. Hidden in a valley that was invisible from any vantage point accessible to casual hikers was a settlement that had been operating in complete secrecy for over 30 years. The community consisted of approximately 40 people living in carefully concealed structures that were invisible from satellite imagery or helicopter surveillance. But this wasn't a peaceful community of nature-loving hermits. The settlement was run like a military compound, with armed guards, sophisticated security systems, and a leadership structure that tolerated no interference from the outside world. Agent Martinez's team found themselves surrounded within minutes of entering the valley. The people who confronted them were well-armed, well-trained, and clearly prepared for exactly this scenario. They had been expecting investigators to eventually follow Ethan's trail. The settlement's leader, a man in his 60s who called himself Colonel Davidson, was a former military officer who had established the community in the late 1980s as a refuge for people who wanted to live completely outside government control. Over the decades, it had evolved into something much more paranoid and dangerous. "We came here to get away from your world," Davidson told Agent Martinez during their tense first meeting. "We don't bother anyone. We don't break your laws outside our territory, and we don't exist as far as your government is concerned. That's the way we want it, and that's the way it's going to stay." But Davidson's definition of not bothering anyone included a very different view of what happened to people who discovered their settlement. Under pressure from federal agents who had surrounded the valley, Davidson finally admitted what had happened to Ethan Rivers. The hiker had indeed found their settlement on September 13th, just as his research had predicted he would. He triggered one of our perimeter defenses," Davidson said, his voice showing no remorse. "A concealed snare designed to deter trespassers. When we found him, he was unconscious but alive. We could have treated his injuries, but he had seen too much." What Davidson revealed next would haunt investigators forever. Ethan Rivers had been awake and aware when they made the decision to ensure he could never report their location. Colonel Davidson's confession was cold and methodical, delivered with the same emotional detachment he might have used to report a military operation. Ethan Rivers had been killed, not in a moment of panic or self-defense, but as the result of a calculated decision to protect the settlement's secrecy. The hiker had documented everything, Davidson explained: his camera, his GPS, his research notes. He had enough evidence to bring federal agents directly to our location. We couldn't allow that to happen. According to Davidson, Ethan had regained consciousness while being held by settlement members who were debating what to do with him. When he realized the situation, Ethan had tried to negotiate, promising to keep their location secret in exchange for his freedom. He seemed like a reasonable man, Davidson said. But reasonable men change their minds when they get back to civilization. We couldn't take that risk. The figure in Ethan's final photograph had been Davidson's son, Michael, who was conducting a perimeter patrol when Ethan managed to take the picture. The park ranger uniform was one of several official-looking outfits the settlement used to discourage curious visitors, people who encountered their rangers were told they had entered a restricted research area and were escorted back to official trails. Davidson led investigators to where Ethan's body had been buried in an unmarked grave deep in the valley. After 5 years, there was little left but bones and the remnants of his hiking gear. But dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. They had found Ethan Rivers. The investigation revealed that Ethan wasn't their first victim. Over the decades, at least 6 other hikers had discovered the settlement and never returned home. Most had been reported as missing persons who had simply vanished in the wilderness, their disappearances attributed to accidents or getting lost in the vast backcountry. Davidson and 12 other settlement members were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. But the legal proceedings raised uncomfortable questions about the other residents of the valley, families with children who had been born in the settlement and had never lived in the outside world. The trial of Colonel Davidson and his associates became a media sensation, raising fundamental questions about the rights of people to live outside mainstream society and the lengths they were willing to go to protect their isolation. Davidson showed no remorse during his testimony, arguing that Ethan Rivers and the other victims had been invaders who threatened the safety and security of his community. "We never hurt anyone who minded their own business," he told the court. "These people came looking for us. They found us, that was their choice." The prosecution painted a different picture. A cult-like community that had evolved from seeking freedom to enforcing isolation through murder. The sophisticated trap systems, the military-style security, and the cold-blooded elimination of witnesses showed a group that had lost any moral connection to the outside world. In 2021, Davidson was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Ethan Rivers and 5 other hikers. 11 other settlement members received sentences ranging from 15 years to life, depending on their level of involvement in the killings. But the fate of the settlement itself remained complicated. Nearly half of the residents, including children who had never lived anywhere else, were allowed to remain in the valley under federal supervision. The area was officially designated as a transitional community, with social workers and law enforcement maintaining a permanent presence to prevent future violence. Ethan's sister, Rebecca, attended every day of the trial, finally learning the truth about her brother's fate. Ethan always said the mountains were full of secrets, she told reporters after Davidson's conviction. He just never imagined that some secrets were deadly. The Blackstone Wilderness was permanently changed by the investigation. The Ghost Valley was added to official maps for the first time in over a century. and the trail system was expanded to include ranger stations that could monitor the area more effectively. Today, the Ghost Valley settlement operates under the official designation of Blackstone Transitional Community, home to 23 people who are slowly integrating with the outside world under federal supervision. The children who were born in isolation are receiving education and health care, while the adults who weren't involved in violence are learning to navigate life beyond their hidden valley. The case changed how law enforcement approaches missing person reports in wilderness areas, particularly when experienced hikers disappear without obvious cause. Ethan's research techniques are now taught to search and rescue specialists, and his documentation methods have helped solve several other cases of people who vanished while exploring remote areas. Rebecca Rivers established the Ethan Rivers Foundation for Wilderness Safety, which provides resources for solo hikers and maintains a database of areas where unexplained disappearances have occurred. The Foundation's motto reflects Ethan's passion while acknowledging the danger he encountered. Explore responsibly. Document everything. Never hike alone. The psychological impact on the search teams who discovered the settlement's dark secrets continues to this day. Several investigators required counseling to cope with the knowledge that they had been searching for a missing person who had been murdered while they were looking for him. Detective Martinez, who led the FBI investigation, reflected on the case during a recent interview. Ethan Rivers was everything we want hikers to be: prepared, responsible, passionate about the wilderness. But he discovered that even in America, there are places where civilization's rules don't apply. His documentation saved other lives by exposing the truth. The abandoned traps and surveillance equipment scattered throughout the Ghost Valley have been removed, but the memory of what happened there serves as a reminder that the wilderness can hide human dangers as well as natural ones. The case of Ethan Rivers proves that sometimes the most dangerous predators in the mountains walk on two legs. For solo hikers who still venture into remote wilderness areas, Ethan's story has become both inspiration and warning. His passion for exploration and meticulous documentation revealed hidden wonders, but also hidden horrors. In the end, his greatest discovery was the truth about his own disappearance, preserved in the photographs that would eventually bring justice to the Ghost Valley and ensure that his killers could never hurt anyone else. The mountains keep many secrets, but some secrets are too dangerous to remain hidden. Ethan Rivers died protecting the wilderness he loved, but his camera lived on to tell the story that saved others from sharing his fate.